Hey everyone, welcome to the webinar. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tom Anthony. I'm the CTO at SearchPilot, and part of my job is thinking about the future of search. How is it going to evolve? What might the strategic implications of that be for our customers and for search marketers in general? And so today I want to talk about a potential shift in the landscape of search based on things that have happened over the last 5 years and how we think that might impact the landscape of search over the next couple of years, and basically food for thought, stuff that we should be thinking about as we start to think about our future search strategy. So I'm coming to you today from Germany. I'm interested in where all of you are coming from, so let me know in the chat. And maybe Germany is a good place to start this conversation, actually, because I moved to Germany about 4 years ago. And when I moved to Germany, I was quite excited because Germany has a reputation for efficiency. And so I was imagining something like this. I lived down south in Bavaria, where the home of Lederhosen. I was imagining this society that was super efficient, modern, everything was going to be running perfectly on time, be totally organized, etc., etc. And so it was only after a couple of days of being in Germany that I was ready for my first taste of this efficiency. And I needed to register as a patient at the doctor's. So I phoned up and I explained to the lady, hi there, yeah, I'd like to register a new patient. And she said, yeah, that's fine. Just need you to send me over your name and this and that detail, etc. Could you just send it over, please, by fax? I thought I'd misheard for a moment, and I sort of let out a little bit of a giggle, like, and just silence on her end of the phone. Maybe I misunderstood. My German's not great, so maybe I misunderstood. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said fax. Yeah. Now, you can say what you want about the rest of German society, but the language itself is quite efficient. That one word was enough for me to know this conversation was over. She really meant it. And so off I went. I spent the next hour or so online trying to work out how do you send a fax in this day and age. And after an hour or so, I found a website where I could send a fax. And what I had to do was write something on a piece of paper, take a photo of it with my phone, and then send that to my computer. Then I'd convert it to a PDF. Then I'd upload it to this website. I'd enter my credit card information, and they would send the fax for me. But this wasn't really the efficiency that I'd been promised. This wasn't what I'd been expecting. But it kind of makes sense if you think about it, because here in Germany, just like back in the UK where I'm from originally, or I imagine in the US and other places, doctors' phone lines are very busy. So they need some way that you can send them information in an asynchronous fashion, which they can then pick up and work on at their leisure. And fax is a perfectly good solution to that problem. Until you remember that email exists. An email is obviously a much more modern solution and much more the solution that most people would be expecting to use in this day and age than fax. So what has all of this got to do with search? Have you come to the right webinar? And so to answer that, let's cast our mind back just over 25 years to 1999. This was around about when I first started working on the web. I first got paid to do web development in 1998. I'm quite old. And this is what Google looked like at this point in time. You've got the Google logo, you've got a search field, and you've got these two search buttons. Okay, so let's fast forward 5 years. 2004. They've updated the logo. We've got some links splashed in there. And then we've got the same search field, the same two search buttons. If we go, and this is also incidentally around about when most of the world stopped using fax machines. And so, yeah, fast forward another 5 years. The links have gone again. We've got that Google logo, search field, two search buttons. Another 5 years, another new logo, but still logo, search field, buttons. Another 5 years, another new logo. The main thing changing on this page seems to be the logo. Oh, they spiced things up and made the end of the search fields curved, but otherwise we've still got logo, search field, and search buttons. Another 5 years coming up to 2024, and 2025 still looks the same and hasn't really changed. And so you might be thinking, oh yeah, but maybe it's different on mobile phone or something like that. On mobile, it looks like this, essentially the same, except the search buttons aren't there because they're in your on built-in keyboard on your phone. Oh, but Tom, they've got an app. Let's look at the app. And the app layout is the same as the mobile version, except the search field is grey. So the point here is that in the last 25 years, if we go back and forth here, you can see the search interface, the primary search interface hasn't really changed. There are, yes, apps and Google Assistant and other things, but the primary search interface that most people are using for Google hasn't barely changed in the last 25 years, other than a little bit of styling. And so we've got this interface that for 25 years hasn't changed, but it's dominated search during that time. This model of search, of typing 2 to 5 keywords into this search field and pressing this button, has dominated search. And I'm going to try to persuade you today that our mental model of what a search engine is slightly out of date. And fax was around for a long time, even after the birth of the internet. It took a long time, even once it wasn't necessarily the best solution anymore, for the landscape to shift, for behaviors amongst people to shift. And so today I'm going to talk you through 4 things. I'm going to talk you through the Google era up until now. How has search looked? Then I want to talk to you about how 5 years ago we had the arrival of the LLMs, ChatGPT 3, I think, or was that rolled out about 5 years ago. I want to talk about the impact that has on search, and it's not about chat. Then I'm going to talk about the changes in traffic levels and how 5 years ago we saw the shift when mobile traffic finally overtook desktop traffic on the internet and the impact that has on search. Then I'm going to wrap this up with a few takeaways, which are going to be strategic food for thought, so that when your boss or maybe your customers or clients are talking to you, you can talk to them about what this future might look like. Okay, so let's start off by talking about the Google era. So everybody here is hopefully very familiar with doing a Google search. You type in 1 to 4 or 5 keywords up in the search field, you press search and you arrive at this screen. And we're searching the web. The corpus, which is the information retrieval term for the body of knowledge that you're searching against, the corpus is the web. We're primarily just searching the web. Yes, there's a couple of edge cases, but primarily the results are web-based. Most searches, or sorry, not most searches, but a lot of searches are single shot searches. That's a tongue twister. So where you put in a search term and you arrive, you click what you wanted, and you go off to the website and you're done. That search is complete. That's a single shot search. But contrary to what I just said, most searches are not single shot searches. Most searches are more complex, where you're going to look at multiple results, go back and forth and do multiple search queries. And part of the reason for this is that typically for more complex searches, we don't put all of our search criteria into the search. So searching for a holiday, this is an example from a couple of years ago when I was trying to plan a holiday for my family, and I might put a search term like this into Google, but in reality I have criteria about exactly where it is, what the travel time is like, does it have beaches nearby, is there a pool that's safe for my toddler, etc., etc. But we understand and we've learned that Google doesn't cope well with long, complex queries like that. we've had this interface, as we talked about, for 25 years. And so over that time, we've been trained to search by putting in 1 to 5 keywords rather than these complex searches. So what that typically results in is a search flow that is something like this. You do a search on Google, and then you start searching through the results. You click the different websites, in my case, these holiday websites, looking and seeing, does this fit my other criteria? And this is essentially the second phase of the same search. This is called post-search browsing. It's an understood phenomenon. Most of the search engines have written papers about exactly this sort of behavior. They understand that you're not putting all of your criteria into the search. They understand they're not fulfilling the complete search journey itself. They're doing phase 1. You're doing phase 2 on yourself. So then what happens is you do a follow-up search on Google and you repeat this process, looking at different results over and over until you end up either frustrated or finally getting to an answer. What we maybe would want to do if we hadn't been trained by Google is type in a search query more like this. Show me holiday itineraries for a family of 5 with a toddler-friendly pool and near the beach and some restaurants in or near Europe. Instead, what we end up doing is something like this. This is the spreadsheet that my wife made when we were trying to plan our holiday. And you can see she's like pulling all this information out of multiple Google searches and putting it all in here. And we're doing that because we don't trust Google to handle this sort of search. So in summary, the Google era we can sum up by being one corpus, the web. Most of the last 25 years has been dominated by web search. Searches are fulfilled one query at a time. We type the query, maybe we then do another query, but it's one query at a time. And the results are primarily links to websites. Now, of course, this is not perfectly true for all cases. This is the broad strokes. And if you look at the conference agenda for most search conferences nowadays, a lot of the presentations will be catering to this model or talking about ChatGPT. Okay, so that's the Google era as it has been. So let's talk about some things that have changed. So 5 years ago, LLMs. And when we talk about LLMs, everybody focuses on chat, but I want to persuade you that the impact of LLMs on search is much broader than just chat. And the immediate impacts that we've already been feeling in the last couple of years haven't been chat-based. So it was GPT-3 that was released 5 years ago in 2020. And this was it was GPT-3 and ChatGPT that came out in 2020. That was when this technology came onto most people's radar, and this was the watershed moment when everybody started talking about it. And yeah, so as I said, this is about more than just chat, and specifically, what I want to talk about today is LLMs and their ability to both understand search queries and the content of the web. So let's start off by talking about search queries. So we've got the same example I just have. And incidentally, I think because of LLMs, Google have been trying to change this behavior to encourage us to enter longer search queries. You might have seen over the last couple of years, they've been experimenting with these little bubble buttons. If you click these, all that happens is it extends your search query, and you can keep clicking them and it keeps extending your search query. This is Google realizing that they've got this problem in how users behave and trying to persuade us, no, we really can cope with longer search queries. Why can they cope with longer search queries? Because of LLMs. Historically, Google would have done very badly with this query. We just talked about that. But if you put it into ChatGPT or another LLM, they understand this long, complex query much better than Google historically has done. And they can have a crack at answering it, but they haven't had real-time data. They don't have the corpus, the body of knowledge that Google has, and so they come up with an answer, but it lacks that detail that we need. But the point being is they understand the search query much better. And so now we see Google encouraging us to enter longer search queries because using LLM and related tech, they're able to better understand long search queries better than they ever have been able to do in the past. But what's important about this is in the past, Google could understand search queries much better than most other people. Anyone wanting to build a search engine themselves had a significant disadvantage because Google had done 20 plus years of research on how to understand a search query, and you weren't going to be able to overcome that. LLMs level the playing field. They really diminish Google's lead here, Google's advantage here, because now anyone who was sufficiently motivated and had enough money could build a search engine that would do maybe not perfectly as well as Google, but a pretty close job in terms of understanding what a search query is compared to Google, which wasn't true a couple of years ago. LLMs make that possible. Okay, so that is talking about the search query. Now let's talk about the corpus, understanding of the web in this case, and understanding the content of the web. So Google have various different mechanisms in play for how they understand the content of the web and how they understand the semantic meaning and layer it like additional understanding onto that content. One of those is the knowledge graph. So you'll be very familiar with searches where you see this knowledge graph on the side. So in this case, I'm doing a search for Alexander Bain, who was the inventor of the fax machine. And we can see we have some details about him. We have some images. We have when he was born, when he died, etc. So we have this sort of semantic knowledge layered on top of the corpus. But for most of the web, like this works well for very well-known top-tier entities. But for most of the web, this isn't how it's done. So one approach to dealing with that over the last few years has been structured markup, using things like the schema.org vocabulary to add semantic meaning to websites. And so the purpose of this was because Google and their crawler coming to a web page couldn't necessarily understand the content as well as they would like. I think in the Google leak that came out, or not the leak, but as part of the court case, they even had a document where they talked about faking their understanding of the web content. And so, yeah, we've been encouraged to add this structured markup to web pages in order to supplement Google's ability to understand the semantics and the content of this page. The vocabulary of choice for that has been schema.org, which has around about 1,400 types, 1,400 attributes that we can represent with schema.org. Now let's compare and contrast that to how LLMs might store knowledge and semantic understanding. GPT-4 has an estimated 100 billion neurons. And so it's a huge order of magnitude change here. If we were to visualize that, we could put schema.org over here, that tiny little pixel you might not be able to see, and GPT-4 would look like this. This is, I did the maths with pi and everything here, so I was quite proud of myself. This is to scale. And so I've recognized that I'm not comparing apples to apples here because these are two different texts built for two different reasons. But the point is that in each case, this is how they would go about storing and understanding, representing knowledge of the web. And you can see that just based on this, but also from your experience using things like ChatGPT, that ChatGPT, these LLM models are able to understand far more nuanced. They understand the content far more richly than something like schema.org would be capable of representing. And this is already out of date. GPT-4 is out of date. They've launched the O1 model now, which is even bigger. And so, yeah, this approach with LLMs can understand that content far better and, interestingly, undercuts the point of structured markup and those sorts of things, because the structured markup is normally a poor representation of the content of a page. It lacks nuance, it lacks detail. And so I'd much rather an LLM read the content that's intended for humans, where all of that nuance, all of that subtlety and uses that to represent the page, than anything that could be represented by structured markup. Now, obviously, Google also have access to this technology, so they can be applying this to understand the content of the web better. But once again, this is a same case as before. Until a couple of years ago, Google's advantage, technological and knowledge advantage in this area, was insurmountable to anyone else who wanted to compete with them. Building a search engine would have been a fool's errand for most people. But LLMs, once again, level the playing field here, because now anyone with sufficient resources can use this to understand web content in a fashion that maybe isn't on par with Google, but isn't an order of magnitude behind it anymore. And later on, we'll see that you don't necessarily need to be as good at Google on the web side of things to compete with them. Okay, so yeah, I mean, the next thing I want to talk about is coming back to this post-search browsing stuff that we talked about earlier, because the advent of LLMs have started to creep up on this model a little bit, mostly in the last 3 or 4 months, with the introduction of the deep research models. So this is OpenAI's model, but we've had DeepSeek, Perplexity, and others releasing these deep research systems. If you haven't come across these yet, I very much encourage you to have a look at them. If you haven't used them, basically, the way this works is with ChatGPT, for example, you can click on the deep research button, put it into deep research mode. Now you can do the same query that I showed you earlier around holidays. I put this in. The first thing it does is asks me some clarification questions, making sure it's understood what I want from it. Then what a deep research model does is it goes off and starts browsing the web, doing searches for me with OpenAI, that'll be in Bing probably, and looking at the results, clicking into those results, passing the real-time, up-to-date content of those web pages, and then starting to compile it for me. So for this query, ChatGPT spent 9 minutes. 9 minutes browsing the web, looked at 21 different web pages for me, and compiled me an itinerary. And the itinerary is quite detailed. It has links to various different websites that it looked at. It's based on up-to-date data. And so you can see you've got suddenly a very different model of search. This is still young, but this is realistically solution's maybe the wrong word, but realistically addresses that post-search browsing behavior we talked about earlier. It moves from iterative single-step queries where the user is doing one query after another to a query where it asks them a clarification, and then there are multiple steps to this where it's refining the queries that it's putting into the search engines for me. And I'm not having to do that myself. And so basically taking that post-search browsing phase out of the picture. As a side note, this emerging deep research stuff also breaks the long-standing paradigm where bots crawl and users browse. If you see bots in your server logs, you historically have been able to ascertain that that's probably a bot that's crawling this content, whereas now that might very well be a bot that's real time browsing your site. ChatGPT at least has different user agents for this, so you can assess this, but just naively looking for and collating bot traffic from your server logs no longer is indicative of crawling. We've now got bots that are crawling on behalf of users, but users might not actually be seeing that content. It's going to be distilling it down or rejecting it. Another really interesting impact of this for search is that search results are being selected by the LLM. What do I mean by that? Imagine that ChatGPT Deep Research is doing these queries for me in Bing. It's then looking at the results and it's selecting a result on my behalf. And so if you're someone who is trying to cater to this result, you're selling holidays or whatever it might be, rankings are no longer the only consideration you need to pay attention to, because now you've got LLMs choosing which result to click. And they might be clicking the fourth result because the title and the snippet speak more to the LLM and how it understands the world. And so it might click that result. Later on, when it compiles all of this to show it to the user, those websites that ranked in places 1, 2, and 3 will never be on the user's radar. Users won't hear about them. The deep research model is just going to show those things it actually looked at. So we've suddenly got another potential paradigm shift. And depending how big this becomes over the next couple of years, it'll be really interesting to see the impact that this has. Okay, so let's jump to talking about something different. So we talked about 5 years ago the advent of LLMs coming onto the scene and how that's impacted search. So now let's have a look at the shift in terms of desktop versus mobile traffic and how that's going to impact search. Okay, so it was around about 5 years ago, give or take, that desktop traffic started to be outpaced by mobile traffic. Why is that important for search? So Google is a child of an era when we interfaced and used the internet very, very differently to how we do it now. When I started using the internet back in the 90s, we had a desktop computer in the house and a modem, and you went and you sat down at that computer and you dialed up with the modem, and then you opened a browser. Because basically, for 99% of use cases, for most people, the browser was the doorway to the internet. This was the internet. It was constrained within this browser. And so it made sense, of course, that that's where Google lives. Typically, yes, I know they have an app and stuff, but typically most people, a lot of search is happening in the browser. And that makes sense when you consider that Google was born in this time when that's how most people use the internet most of the time, opening a browser. However, that's not the world we live in anymore. Nowadays, we have smartphones and even our desktop machines are perpetually connected to the internet. You've got on your smartphone multiple different apps, and those apps are going to be connecting to multiple different data sources, multiple different corpuses. So you might have a recipe app that is connecting to some cloud recipe system where you're storing your recipes and maybe looking at others. You've got Facebook that are storing all this knowledge. Some of it's represented on the web, but there's a lot more in this sort of social database they have. You've got messages in your WhatsApp, your emails, etc., all represented or all interfaced with through different apps. And it's no longer just the browser. And so my hypothesis, or not my hypothesis, my suggestion is that it makes much more sense for search to belong here. Right, at the device level, because the device is now internet aware, it's baked in at every layer. If you were designing a search engine, and somehow we'd got to this point in time and nobody had built a search engine, we would almost certainly design a search engine that is operating at that device level. So that's one aspect to consider. Another aspect to consider is changes in user behaviors over the time as well. So this is the Google Trends data for the phrase Google it. And as many of you maybe heard, younger generations don't necessarily say Google it, they might say search it up. And so you can see over the last few years, same time period, this has been trending upwards, whereas Google it has been trending slightly downwards. So let's have a look at what that means. So these are my kids. This is Matilda, who's 13, Philippa, who is 10, and Hetty, who is 6. Let's have a look at how they each search, because they're quite well spaced out over the sort of time period that we've been considering. So Matilda is 13. She typically doesn't say Google it. She doesn't say search it up either. She'll sometimes says Google it, sometimes says search it, sometimes doesn't. She uses ChatGPT a lot already. She asks it questions, she uses it for homework, etc., etc. She does use Google for online shopping. And she was taught to use Google by me, my wife, years ago when she first started using the internet and supervised. And so we trained her in that sort of way of searching. It might be easy to discount, like, why do we care about what a 13-year-old is doing on the internet? She already does online shopping. She has a bank card. She is allowed to online shop with supervision. We're not mad. But she'll search for clothes and she'll go to different brands and look through, etc. And then when she's ready, she'll speak to a parent and say, oh, I'm planning to buy this and this and this, whatever. Point being is she's the searcher, she's making those decisions, she's already someone who is on your revenue charts. Okay, so that's the 13-year-old. Let's jump to the other end of the scale and talk about Hetty, who is 6. She is still learning to read. She's learned about 21 of the 26 letters now. There are 26 letters, aren't there? Not 24. I get confused. Doesn't matter. She searches regularly for several years now by voice. We have Alexa devices around the house. Suddenly realised I shouldn't say that word in my office. Might set it off. And so she uses that device or the Siri on my wife's phone to do searches. Show me pictures of horses. What's the weather going to be like today when she's getting ready for school? How far is it to this place that she knows we're going because she doesn't like being in the car? So she does complex searches and she does them in natural language, and she's been doing that for several years. So the question here is, will she ever revert to using keywords over natural language? She has learned searching in a world where she didn't before she could read or write. And so when she gets a smartphone in a few years' time, you get a smartphone when you turn 10 in our house, why would she regress to searching with keywords? I don't think she would. I think she's going to be a natural language searcher from here on forth forever. Perhaps most interesting to the conversation today is Philippa, who's 10. So before we talk about Philippa, I want to talk about a prediction that I made in March 2022 at the SMX Munich conference here in Germany. And this was the mock-up that I made where I predicted that Apple, based on the trends I've outlined to you today, moving that search to the device layer, I predicted that Apple were going to add a search field to their iOS home screen in order to encourage and change user behavior, to encourage us to start doing searches at the device layer where they don't need to be constrained to just the web. Based on this, you want a device level search that can search across all these different corpuses. Then it was only a couple of months later that iOS 16 rolled out and they added this search field. Much prettier than my mock-up, but it was really exciting that one, I'd been proven right and I could brag about it, but two, that we were on the right track, that the breadcrumbs did lead in this direction. And this is relevant because this is how Philippa searches. She'll press this search button and do searches. So she's often using this device level iOS search field. She still uses Amazon devices for informational queries when she's around the house or doing homework or anything. Even when she's got a phone next to her, she'll be sat at the table and she'll still ask via voice search for certain queries. She uses Google infrequently. She's a native device level searcher. And she's a bit young for online shopping, but within a couple more years, she will be shopping. And so we're going to have a generation of searchers who don't start in Google, but start at the device layer, who start outside of that sort of traditional Google era model. And so what might that look like if Apple were to sort of double down on this, which I think they've already done a lot of what I'm talking about, but I think they're going to keep on building it out. First thing to talk about and note is that Apple have got an app store with over 2 million apps available on it. And that's a big advantage to them, something to leverage. How does that look? So you can imagine that, well, thinking about running a search on Google, you might be still searching for that elusive holiday, and you type in Madrid into Google, and it goes and it searches the web corpus, maybe supplements it with a couple of other sources, but it's going to search that web. Because it's constrained to the web, you've done this search in a web browser. You do it on an Apple device at the device level with that search field. And now Apple can do something like this, using what's called a federated search approach. So rather than just ask the web, which they can do, it was also 5 years ago that Apple silently changed the Siri search field from using Google's web index to Apple's own web index. They've got quite a mature web index themselves, and all of the LLM stuff we talked about earlier is just only going to improve that. But this is also being able to be federated to other apps where that search can now be tended to by the various different apps on your phone. But how's the phone going to know? It can't just send this search query to every app. But when an app is installed on an iOS device, it's allowed to register intents and tell the device, I know how to deal with these types of intent. And so you type in this search into the search field on your iOS device, and the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to try to identify the intents. Are you looking to book a flight or book a hotel or learn the language? Are you looking to check the weather or get a travel guide or whatever? Once it's mapped these intents, which is fairly easy with the LLM powered stuff we talked about earlier, then you can now start mapping these to the various apps on the device and send these out, these search queries to each of these apps, and at the same time look in your own web index. So the point is that Apple can serve many of the same search intents as Google via apps without using the web. They still got a web index. It only needs to be good enough, which in this LLM world where Google's advantages have been largely diminished is much more viable than previously. Second interesting thing to note here is that federated results are real time. Google web results, it might have crawled your website several days ago, that updates index, and then by the time I come along to do a search, that information is out of date. Whereas when I'm outsourcing a search to the app, it's able to go away and look in its own database and get real-time information. Also, worth noting that once you are doing searches that aren't web-based, you can have much more native search UIs. So the way you present the results can be much more flexible. So I might ask, how do I get to the conference center in Munich? And then the phone might say, oh yeah, Uber can help with that. And then Uber, the app can say, oh yeah, I could pick you up in 1 minute with this lovely little live widget. So you get much more power in the user interface if you're not constrained to just the web. And so what happens if I don't have the app or an appropriate app to cater to a certain search? So Apple have a concept called app clips. It's not so big in Europe. It's a bit bigger in the US. Sometimes you see vending machines, etc., with QR codes for app clips. And app clips are basically miniature versions of an app. They're part of an app that does a particular singular function of an app. But importantly, you don't need to install them. They can be streamed to your phone, and then you can use it, and then when you close it, it's gone. It's not saved on your phone like a normal app. And this is really interesting when you match it up with the other stuff that I just talked about, because we talked about how apps can register intents. Well, Apple know what all those intents are for all of the apps in their app store, not just the ones on your device. And so now Apple could be building what I'd call an intent index, where they've got all of these apps and app clips, and they know what intents they can serve. And so now if I do a search query, it might offer me an app clip that caters to that search query, something I don't have installed yet, but which I can just click the button and it'll open straight away, and I'll go straight into this interface that's designed to cater to this search query. And it being an app clip means it gets all of the magic of being an app. So things like buy with Apple Pay or sign in with Apple, etc. And so you could imagine that you arrive in a new city and you want to get a coffee on your way to a meeting. This is not somewhere you live, so maybe you search on your iOS device field, I want a coffee, and it might say, oh, there's an app clip for a coffee shop that you're nearby because it knows where you are. And so you click that, it takes you straight into the app, which shows you the menu. Yes, I'll have the English breakfast tea, please. You order that, and using Apple Pay, you pay. Using sign in with Apple, you give them your name, and within a couple of minutes, you can be walking into that coffee shop, picking up your lovely cup of tea, and walking out, and you have not used the web at all in this whole flow. But this is very much a search scenario in my mind. And end to end, this was entirely a device native experience. And this is search. We might not think of it as search, but this is search. Philippa, for example, wouldn't differentiate doing this sort of search from another search, which might end up in Google on doing 10 blue links. We saw, whenever it was, 6-9 months ago, Apple announced Apple Intelligence. It's been rolling out over the last few months, and in Apple Intelligence, they're starting to do some of the stuff that I talked about, where they're doing search queries that are mapping across multiple different apps, and mashing up the results. So you can do searches, and it says, "Oh yeah, you want to know how long it is to go to the airport. I know that's because you're planning to pick up your mum because of those message in WhatsApp from the flight or the Skyscanner app. I know that when that flight's on time, just to let you know it's running a little bit delayed or whatever." And so you get a much richer search experience when you've got a search engine that can tap into all of these different corpuses, and it's tapping into them in a personalized, logged in fashion, which is not something Google can do in that web world. It knows that when you search, you can look into your you search for a recipe and it looks into your messages, it looks into your recipes app, etc. So it's getting your personalized, logged in content. So I've shown you that some of that with the Apple stuff is happening, some is predictive, but basically I wanted to outline between that and the deep research stuff, these emerging new models of search that are not web-centric or are not Google keyword-centric, break away from that Google era that we've been talking about. Okay, so let's wrap this up with a few tactical takeaways before we talk about more strategic stuff. So in this world, very tactical level thing to consider is that at the moment, LLMs typically aren't executing JavaScript. So if you want to be playing in this deep research world, then you need to make sure your website is functional and working without relying on JavaScript. Otherwise, you're losing the advantages to you're giving your competitors an opportunity to get ahead. We should recognize that dark traffic will increase, so attribution is very difficult in this world. When you've got deep research tools visiting your site, or you're coming from iOS search, that looks like direct traffic. Attribution in this model is very, very difficult, and I don't think anyone's quite solved this yet. You should increasingly make sure you're considering LLMs when writing content, not because you should get LLMs to write the content necessarily, but because you need to make sure you're speaking to those LLMs, especially when you consider things like they might be bypassing rankings because they're going to compile results to show them to the user. As an example of that, I have here a shower holder from the bathroom wall, and it's broken. And so I wanted to replace this. So I took it off the wall, and I noticed that it had been mounted by two screws that had already been drilled into the wall, obviously, that were exactly 3 centimeters apart. And so I didn't care too much how this looks. What I really wanted to do was avoid having to drill more holes into the walls in these tiles in the bathroom. And so in an ideal world, what I'd be able to do is say, I'm looking for a shower holder to hold a shower of this dimension, which is mounted with 2 screws that are 3 centimeters apart vertically. A traditional Google era model search would not cope with that sort of search at all. I'd have to do the post-search browsing, looking through all the results, hoping to find one that mounts in that way. But you can imagine an LLM-powered search catering to that sort of search, but it would need to have the knowledge that the screws are mounted 3 centimeters apart. So my point is that when you're talking about persuading LLMs, not just trying prompt injection or trickery, but consider that you can give far more detail, far more nuance, far more granularity to searches using this sort of technology than you could in the past. And so there's a real advantage to be had there by being the person who has that level of detail about your products, your services, whatever it might be, that caters to these far more nuanced searches and far more complex searches. Okay, almost done. So the next thing to note is that web search isn't going anywhere, but is becoming far more complex. In a world where you've got LLMs that are understanding and parsing those queries, where search engines are encouraging us to do longer, more complex queries, and where LLMs are crawling and understanding the content of the web, it's becoming much, much harder to predict what does and does not work in SEO. This is just an extension of something that I've been thinking about for quite a few years now. This was one of the motivators for us starting SearchPilot. We recognized that web search was becoming more and more complex. It was becoming harder and harder to predict what's working, and you needed to start doing a more data-driven approach to SEO, which is what we do at SearchPilot. We do SEO A/B testing, so basically helping you draw a line from we made these changes to the website, it resulted in this much traffic, meaning this much revenue, and basically getting like proving the ROI of proving the value of search and SEO. And so we work with lots of amazing companies doing this. We've been doing it quite a few years now, and so we've gotten pretty good at doing this. So if you're interested, then with new customers, we normally do a discovery day, and we're offering these free to anyone who's interested. And basically, you would be with either our CEO, Will, or our COO, Craig, and you would sit down with us and we'd talk you through what's your level of maturity for SEO testing now. How can you go about getting frameworks and models in place to launch your own SEO testing program to basically cater to that world I'm talking about, where web search is going to keep on becoming more complex, and being able to prove the value, draw the line from this change to this impact on search is increasingly important. So yeah, no obligation, free discovery day with one of our team. If you're interested, you can either click the link here or scan the QR code. Okay, so final couple of thoughts. In 2024, there were 17 billion faxes sent. Why am I telling you this? It's because it's, and also like some of the sources I looked at talked about the fax industry is still growing. I'm not just mind blowing, but why is this important? It might be tempting to think from what I've talked about today that I'm trying to suggest that this model, this Google-based search model, is going away. That is definitely not what I'm suggesting. I think this will continue to grow. I think it will drive more and more traffic and more searches. But I just think it won't be the only model in town. And so we need to prepare for a world that's a little bit more diverse, where there are different search engines or search approaches that we should be thinking about in addition to this. And so, yeah, I think we've had this sort of Google era where there's one corpus, the web, searched one query at a time, primarily resulting in links to websites. And I think we're entering this emerging era where there's multiple corpora of interest that can be searched in different ways. We've got multiple queries, either through federated searches or for agents doing searches and post-search browsing for us. And the results are either web or results in apps, device native searches, or recommendations directly. Hopefully you found this interesting. We can jump into some Q&A in the chat now. If you have questions and you want to ask them in the Q&A for whatever reason, you can find me on Blue Sky here, or if you happen to be German, my fax number is here. Hopefully we have time for Q&A. Let's jump into the chat now and see what you think. Thanks very much.